So I wrote a bit about ritual and how ritual, which seems to be the most localized thing in the world and the most specific and particular to a certain group and a certain place, could actually acquire some sort of geopolitical perspective and be universalized in a variety of ways. And took as my example Jewish ritual, because Jewish ritual is devoted to Jews, of course, or most of the rituals are. Some aren't. I mean, the rules of the Sabbath, for example, apply to everybody. So not just to Jews, but to those who are working with or for Jews, they are supposed to obey those rules as well. But on the whole, rituals for Jews, who are a very small group of people, of course, are very specific to that small group of people, and they're not applicable to anybody else. So they seem to be a very bad example of a sort of a ritual which might apply to everyone. In fact, that seems to be wrong. And, you know, when one brings in theories of ritual like the Confucian, for example, which sees ritual as being the bedrock of general society, as being very important, as being vital for the precise functioning of human affairs in an acceptable way, it seems to be very different. You know, it seems to be very different. And, you know, we sort of end up by looking at a theory of ritual which is, you know, lays some claim to actually, you know, produce arguments as to why people should follow this ritual. Whereas in religious ritual, the argument is, if it's an argument, is that God wants us to do it. Because on the whole, we have no idea in religions why a particular ritual is a particular ritual. Some rituals we can work out roughly why they might have been imposed or chosen, because they seem to be rational. They seem to be fit in with where people are, what their interests are, who are important to them within the family structure or in society. But other rituals seem to be entirely arbitrary. You know, why should you do something with one hand and not another hand? Or why should you do something in one way and not another way? Or why should you wear something on your head or not wear something on your head? I mean, it seems to be, you know, sort of nonsense. Why not? I mean, it just seems to be important because God says it's important. And of course, we're used to the idea of doing something that we don't understand if somebody in whom we have trust tells us to do it. So when my central heating breaks down and I call the central heating engineer and he or she fixes it, I hope, you know, I don't expect to understand how they do it or why they do it in a particular way, because if I understood that, I would fix it myself. But I don't. You know, I trust them, and they get it done, I hope. So perhaps the Jewish view or the Islamic view, the Christian view, the Abrahamic view of ritual is that God knows, we don't know, and we repose trust in him. And if he tells us to do something, then we assume there's a point to it. And whatever the point is, doesn't matter. I mean, a Muslim thinker, Al-Ghazali, argued even that the point of rituals is that they have no point. They have no point, and we obey them because of our attitude towards God. if God asks us to do something, we do it. And even if we have no idea why we're supposed to be doing it. So, that's a very sort of specific view of ritual, which seems very much against the idea of ritual as something for which we can see a rationale, for which sort of strengthens society. After all, how is society strengthened by people doing things just because they're told to do them? Even if we can think of some reason for doing it, but what's the point? What's the point? How could this be broadened geopolitically? How could it be made something much wider that would sort of bind different people together? After all, I mean, we're familiar with the way in which a particular club may have its own ritual, may have a tie, a necktie, or a hat, or a jacket, or a way of starting dinners. And that just is the way in which the club does it. Other clubs do other things, and that's all right. But how can that be broadened? And I sort of argue that, there is an important thing about ritual here, which is that in people thinking about how their daily life is going to be conducted, they're trying to impose order on that life and on their relations with other people. And that, the principle behind that is very significant. The specific nature of what they do is not particularly significant, but the principle behind it is very significant. And we should reflect on that principle, perhaps, a bit. And the principle is that we are not entirely autonomous as individuals. We have links with others, not just with other people, but even links with ourselves and perhaps with God, if we're theists. And those are links, those are considerations which do have geopolitical consequences and which do bring us into contact with the idea of the world and humanity as a more extensive set of people and things that have claims on us. So I sort of argue that we shouldn't really see ritual in the sense of being something narrow and limiting, although that's often how we experience it. We often experience a ritual as something which constrains us, as restricts us, makes us act in certain ways. And they do, of course. And sometimes when people throw off rituals, throw off their religion, or abandon their religion, or adopt a different religion, of course, it's also possible, suddenly the rituals may change. And there's this great sense of liberation, perhaps, because they're no longer constrained by the same restrictions as they had in the past. And that's important. But on the other hand, once you throw off constraints, your links with those around you and with the world around you changes, perhaps for the better, perhaps not, but they change. And the idea that we can adopt a lifestyle without ritual, I think this is a very important point that the Confucians make. The idea that rituals are not significant, are things we can pick and choose, is problematic. Is problematic not just for the future of rituals, but it's problematic for the future of our relationships with each other and with the world in which we live. So my argument was, I think, that rituals are important things, and they shouldn't be seen as, narrow. I mean, they are narrow, but that's the point of them. I mean, narrow things, small things are important. I mean, in Judaism, to give an example, blood is something which Jews are not supposed to consume in any way. And if there is a speck of blood on a piece of meat, for example, then there's a problem with consuming that piece of meat. And it is the custom of observant Jews, when they find a speck of blood on a piece of meat, like a chicken, for example, they would take it to a rabbi and they would ask whether they're allowed to eat it. And that seems to be a very peculiar sort of ritual for people to undergo. On the other hand, when one thinks about it, a person is saying that it's so important to me to get this thing right that I am prepared to sacrifice a significant amount of money, perhaps by not being able to eat the bird, to try and get it to do what I think God wants me to do, to act in accordance with the plan that God has for me and my community. And that seriousness about one's life and about one's purpose in life and about how one's going to act and how one's going to relate to the world in which one lives, that I think is not narrow. I think that expresses an attitude of seriousness and integrity towards much wider important issues. And so my conclusion is that ritual is not something that should be seen only as narrow and specific, but it has much wider consequences. And with that point, I would like to finish. Thank you very much for your attention.